Yes.
Mr. Safranek, my question to you is, I have been told, recently divorced about a month, and I was pressured into signing the shared parenting, which Faye had mentioned.
Yes.
Shared parenting agreement.
Yes.
My question is, do you feel that I would have any grounds to challenge that shared parenting, being that my husband is in an adulterous relationship and taking my children to that apartment with the girlfriend, and they're sharing the same bedroom?
My point on this is, from the court's perspective,
The court really doesn't care what is going on once a party's divorced. It doesn't matter, your husband could have a harem there, and the state really doesn't care. So and this is the unfortunate status of American families all across America. Essentially, the spouse who wants to raise their children in accordance with their faith, as they agreed to when people married, has no more control over those kids than their spouse does. So 50% of their time, more or less, is spent in this situation. And it really has struck me in dealing with this and looking at it that they talk about the fact that children of divorce have much higher rates of psychological instability and marital problems, etc. And it makes sense. I mean, I can't imagine as an adult, I bet all of you would feel the same way. Can you imagine that you spent half your time sleeping in one bed and half your time in another bed with two different rules? No, I'd go crazy. I couldn't function as an adult doing that. And we expect kids to somehow seamlessly manage this. And it's impossible. And we're reaping the fruits of that. And so I think that it's a very difficult situation we're in, and I can't promise you anything other than we need to continue to fight this because it's such a catastrophe for our society.
In the contract that my attorney wrote, it said that we agreed to that he would take them to Mass on Sunday, and that they were baptized in the Catholic Church, and that they were they were raised. It didn't say shall be raised in the Catholic Church.
Yes.
And I was just, Faye and I were looking at that and wondering,
Here's the gist of the question.
could that, yeah.
And can you put us on the microphone?
sure.
If part of the civil shared parenting plan states that the kids shall be raised Catholic,
Yes.
the Catholic Church has understandings about skin.
Yeah. No, I think
So is there something that...
right.
Lines.
If you put that in the agreement, if you put in that the children shall be raised Catholic, the question is, will the children be raised Catholic or not? And you'd put that in the shared parenting plan, then I think you have an argument for that. The difficulty you're going to have is the judges don't like to deal with it because what do they know, right? And depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, you might not get any backup from the religious, and I don't want to go too far down that path, but that is an issue that you face. But I think it was a wise thing for you to do, and it would give you some leverage later on, or it should give you some leverage. You're going to have to dispute that, but I think you certainly could get some leverage from it. Although anybody can find a professor of theology at some university, and they'll say, well, that's perfectly fine, that they should be allowed to do it. And that's the real difficulty, is that what do you do once we get into this situation? You in fact promised when you got married that you would raise your children as Catholics. When you promise to raise your children as Catholics, that's a significant promise that you make. In fact, the church can't marry you unless you agree to do that. So it just shows you how important that is from the perspective of the Catholic Church, yet from the perspective of the civil authorities, that's of no value at all. Is there another hand? Yes.
I had a question. The other day I just caught Bay on Pastor Sanders' show, and you had mentioned that knowledge of the system worked against you, but I tuned in late and I didn't catch what you meant by that. And I wonder if either one of you could touch upon what Bay meant, like when she said that. Knowledge of the divorce system.
What happens is that because she was seen to have knowledge of the system, okay? If they think you have knowledge of the system, then they will hold that against you because they prefer people not to have knowledge of the system. You have to think about how this takes place. You know, it's difficult if you've never been through it. And the one thing that besides all these other things, I think that they should mandate as part of pre-Cana training that every couple go to a contested divorce. Okay? It should be mandatory that they go to a contested divorce. And the difficulties that you have is that these numbers that I give you are solid numbers, and they're only even higher. So, as a consequence of this type of a volume business that they're doing, from the state's perspective, they can only manage this if they're just stamping these things out. Okay, they stamp them out. You don't have this fine system all set up to manage this part of the law. In fact, having spent these 2 weeks here in great city of Cleveland with Faye on this case, one of the things that you see is that the most significant relationship that courts ever determine is this one. Yet it is treated as one of the least significant ones. In other words, the only thing that's probably treated as less significant from the perspective of the courts is a traffic ticket. So here you have this significant human relationship where you would expect to have the greatest degree of sensitivity and carefulness, etc., and the state's just stamping them away. And it's a natural consequence of this huge volume. When you get this huge volume of divorce, the natural consequence is, we got to churn here. We got to churn and burn kind of deal.
So just so I understand, because the way that I felt when I went through this process 7 years ago was, once I entered the domestic relations court and I entered into agreement with a lawyer, that the system, once I said yes to that lawyer, once the petition for a no-fault divorce was filed, my relationship with my lawyer was therefore corrupt, and it was just a profitable enterprise for the attorney to represent me.
Okay, now you're entering into another area, and that is, you said that your experience was that once you started signing your papers and you'd kind of enter into it, now the lawyer was just in the business of moving this along.
Part of the rubber stamp.
Right. And I think that that's exactly right. And again, this is why I recommend that people should get out of the system. Because the very moment one of the parties steps into a lawyer's office in this system, they're immediately thinking, what's best for me is to move this thing along. Right? I make the most money, that's best for me is to move this whole thing along. They're not interested at all in reconciliation or in any other way, ensuring that the couple gets back together. And so, in fact, what they do is try to play them off against each other, try to increase the degree of animosity, to increase the antagonism, and it's a natural process because the very nature of our system is an adversarial system. So, I don't want to blame the lawyers for everything, but, it is, to some degree, we have an adversarial system. So the minute you begin to get into this process, the natural thing is for the lawyer to protect the client, in a sense, from the other client. And that means animosity, that means conflict. And there's nothing built into the system to ensure that the greatest efforts are made to bring the couple back together. And one of the big, I'm not completely against the no-fault system in this respect. We have lots of Vegas marriages. From my perspective, they're not marriages at all, right? I mean, who is this actress got married out in Vegas? I forget her name, or who she was. Britney Spears or somebody. I don't know who these people are. I'm culturally illiterate, but given the culture, it's not all bad. She gets married up in Vegas, and then she wants to get out of it. Okay, fine. It's not really a real marriage, so we'll let you get the quickie out, right? I mean, it makes sense in the society in which we live. But for people who take marriage seriously, why should we be forced to have a Vegas marriage? Because that's what they do, is they treat the most serious marriage the same as Britney Spears' marriage. And that's really a travesty. It's a one-size-fit-all. And we can go ahead and have, I'm for freedom. You go ahead. You have your freedom to have your no-fault marriage. That's fine. You can sign up for the no-fault version. We'll go up for the authentic one. True marriage is different. And, that's the most important thing. And I can tell you, I think that, everything that we're seeing now with regard to the breakdown of marriage and new marriages and multiple marriages and everything, it's all completely logical from the perspective of what we've gone through. I kind of gave you that history of marriage, and you can see how the logic, the line just extends itself. You draw your points on the line, it's going to keep going. And so you can see where this is all going to go and where it's going. It's just natural as you begin to break down the meaning of marriage that it's going to essentially have no meaning. One of the things that I've done in the last couple of years is I've read lots of articles by people talking about marriage. And one of the most fascinating things that I've seen in the vast majority of the arguments that are made in favor of the new civil unions that are taking place across America is, hey, look at all the divorces. That's the number one argument. They use it all the time. Look, marriage obviously doesn't mean very much to heterosexuals, so why should we be able to do the same thing? It's not us. It's not us who screwed up marriage. It's already screwed up. So why shouldn't we be able to get any of the benefits that accrue to people who get married? You see it all the time. I started, sort of taking note of, how often is this used? By far the number one argument. By far the number one argument. And so you can see what's taking place in people's minds, right? You might say, well, that's irrational, but you can see the way in which this shapes the culture, right? It begins to shape the culture because people see that this is something that has been, the value has been taken out of it. And once that value is extracted, you're going to end up with a sort of a free-for-all. Yes, Mary?
I'm coming with the perspective of a parent of teenagers who I'm trying to train, especially looking at my sister's situation, to get into a marriage that this could never happen in. And so, obviously, this covenant idea that you're talking about really appeals to me. Could you elaborate a little bit on what would happen if someone was in one of those kind of marriages that you're speaking of as an ideal? What would happen when they get into trouble? And are there people out there that could even help them at this stage of the game?
Yeah, I think the idea behind it is very simple. Look, what these agreements do is they say we will go to another dispute mechanism, resolution mechanism. And prenuptials, if that's what you want to call them, covenant agreements, have been recognized across America in different jurisdictions in different ways. They tend not to get recognized to the degree where one party uses them to keep all the property and give their spouse nothing. Okay, so that usually gets you in trouble. And this agreement doesn't do that. It merely commits one to a procedure by which you agree to follow the teachings of the church in this whole thing. So the idea behind this is that is to develop procedures both within the church and alongside the church to ensure that when this happens, the first thing that happens to a couple is everything is done for reconciliation. It's really what should be done. And this is not an easy route to go. Okay, and in fact, Bay and I were talking about this on the way down here. And the difficulty of it is that the bishops and the priests, I think, feel themselves to some degree overwhelmed by this crisis that they in part have created or allowed to take place. So they don't know what to do. And as is the history of the church, usually the way in which to get things done is to get the laity involved in doing them. And so that's really what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to get this. I'm going to be talking to some bishops, etc., and we're going to try to formalize structures for actually doing it. But the number one idea is reconciliation, right? Every effort at reconciliation. And it may be the case that in some of these instances that an annulment is the proper decision, right? I mean, you don't know, right? An annulment can be the proper decision. The most difficult sort of legal issue is what happens when the church doesn't grant an annulment will the party then be able to go to civil courts and get a divorce? That's an open question. Okay, that's an open question. I'd say today, looking back at the last 30 years, the answer will be they'll still get a divorce. Okay? They'll get a divorce. But looking forward, I'm not so sure that that's the case. Okay, and I'm not so sure to what degree. I mean, they'll get a civil divorce, but they'll still have a lot of things determined by the Catholic tribunal. And I think it'll be very difficult, for instance, well, let me just say first, the spouse who finds himself in that situation is going to have to, they're going to have to suffer through that, and I'm not saying that's easy, but I think that's what's going to happen. But at least, to some degree, that person is not going to get sort of eviscerated by the civil procedure where they're kind of treated like it's no fault. And the children are going to be protected in that situation because the church is going to use its procedures to protect the children from not being raised in the Catholic faith. So I think, it doesn't mean we win everything. I can't promise you, victory on high and we're going to win it all. But I think that what we can do is begin the process of winning some battles so that this chaos that is taking place all across America, and Catholic churches across America, Catholic families all across America, is pulled back some. Okay?
Can I just clarify?
Yeah.
So what you're saying is the structures for people in trouble right now don't even exist.
No.
And
No.
that part of the whole goal is to help
Absolutely.
the church create those structures.
Absolutely. In fact, what you see out there is that it's actually very fascinating to look at all, because I've spent a lot of time on this, and Bay has too, and others have. But really the church's whole focus has been pre-Cana and troubled marriages. Right? In other words, you have retrovi, and you have marriage encounter, and you have some other things. There are some other things, but really the church's real focus has been that pre-Cana, sort of things like retrovi, marriage encounter, which I take nothing away from them. But sort of my perspective on this is the most significant relationship that people have. The church has always called it, from I think Augustine's time, or maybe even earlier, they call the family the domestic church. Okay? And as the family goes, so goes the church. And that is in many ways prophetic today, because as the family goes, so goes the church. And as the church has dealt with the family, so has gone the family. They're mutually related to each other. And so this, the crisis is upon us to see, what's going on. You can see it. And I think that we need to have regular procedures, lots of things done in parishes on a regular basis to help the people who think they have a normal marriage. Most of the people who end up getting a divorce, at least one of them usually thinks they got a normal marriage. The other one doesn't for some reason. And we're not doing anything to help those two see eye to eye. Right? There's almost nothing, unless they go to a marriage encounter, retrovi, there's nothing kind of in a regular fashion. As I say, how much gas are we really putting in that gas tank on a regular basis at the parish level? So I have a lot of ideas about it, Mary, but there's a lot of things I'd like to see him do. And I think that finally we really are at a point where there are many bishops who are thinking about this. The church sees it as a crisis. Both the first, John Paul II spoke about it, and Benedict XVI. And so we're going to see a lot of I think change in this area, and we need to be able to help move it. I told you what the number one thing you should do to help take care of that, man. Stupid. I got that on tape too, so Father Scanlon will. Yeah, absolutely. There has to be a real attempt to do this. I mean, one of the things that you see is you do have a lot of these teenage groups. How much time is really spent on marriage preparation for these kids? And that's what they should be doing, really. Instead of bowling, they should be talking about. They should have married people, young married people, middle-aged married people, different married people come and talk to these kids about marriage, what it's about, what you should be looking for, what you should be doing, all those sorts of things. Really, there has to be a focus on it. And there really isn't any. Unfortunately, I should say this, I don't think that there is the regular focus that needs to be there. Spain.
Can you address the separation of church and state? Objection that always comes up.
Well, you know, there's always this question of separation of church and state, which isn't in the Constitution. If you look through there, you won't find it at all. So there's not in the First Amendment, it's not this term, the separation of church and state. But it is an issue. What power does a church have versus what power does a state have? When you look at marriage, marriage is generally fairly seen to be composed from the perspective of the state as a status, right? You are married or you're not married. It's seen to encompass some contractual relationships. You have some rights and liabilities contractually as a consequence of it. And it encompasses, in the natural course of things, children. There is no doubt to me that the contractual aspects of it can be dealt with in a civil form, okay, in a civil way. There's no doubt that can be dealt with. Children, I think, to some degree can be dealt with, but ultimately, the state has an interest in ensuring that the children are properly cared for, right? That's why we have child services and all these sorts of things. So how much leeway they're going to give to the church, they're going to have to give them some, because I think it'd be very difficult for them to say, you know, the oldest courts in the history of Western civilization can't make good judgments in this area. We can make better ones. The status issue, as I've told you, I think is a difficult one, that ultimately the state may determine that a person can get divorced even though the church doesn't grant him an annulment. So there are these separate areas to some degree that the state will take control over and that the church has authority over. What has happened today, really quite frankly, is the church has no authority over marriage. Zero. We only get to marry people. That's it. The church today, from a legal standpoint, is merely a beautiful backdrop. From a legal standpoint, that's all it is. And the church, at the very least, should tell people that. You may think you're doing something serious here, but we don't think you are, really. Sacramentally we do, but otherwise we don't, and we're not interested in any of it. And, you know, your spouse can walk away from you, and it's no fault, and that's the way it is. And your kids, even though you promised to raise them Catholic, if your spouse later decides not to, there's nothing we can do about it or nothing we want to do about it. I mean, at least kind of have some truth in advertising. But, you know, we have this feeling that this is a serious thing. And I'm just saying we should try to back that up with some reality behind it. Let's make what's real, real. Yes?
Are you seeing many movements in the States? I know that it was several years ago, Louisiana had a covenant marriage movement. It didn't, as far as I know, it didn't go over very well. Like, it was basically the choice of the spouse when they got married. It was either no fault divorce or marriage.
Yeah.
Covenant marriage, I think 97% chose the no fault marriage.
Yes.
Shot.
That's right.
Have you heard any
Yeah.
that or
Yeah.
any state trying to do that?
Yeah, there have been a couple other states that have adopted the sort of Louisiana viewpoint. The thing you have to realize about it is the Louisiana system doesn't do very much. That's the problem with it, is why choose it? Because, you know, all it really did is, in essence, it said, we agree to go to some counseling, we'll do X, Y, and Z, and we'll spend a little more time before we get divorced. I think it extended the time. You couldn't get a divorce for a year. You couldn't even really file. You had to agree to kind of wait for a year, and then you'd go forward after you'd done these sorts of things. So it really, I don't think, was enough of a change to merit people making that choice, and not many people chose it. You know, and I've got a very simple perspective. You know, as a father of 3 young ladies and 4 young men, and certainly I know that if anyone ever asks for the hand of my daughters in marriage, I'm going to say, hey, you sign. You know, I mean, you can go get a Vegas marriage with some other girl. With my girl, that's not what's going to take place here. And, you know, if more parents were protective of their children in that fashion, which they should be, then I think this movement will take on a lot of, it will really grow. And I think that people are looking for it. I mean, we hear what the situation is like out there. And so I think that there's a deep desire on the part of people to try to have authenticity here in marital life. And that's what we're trying to create, is authentic Catholic marriage. Yes?
I mean, the abortion issue, I mean, the waiting period has obviously been an economic thing that's been discussed and tried to be put out there in legislature. Is that being discussed? I didn't know that was a change in the way divorce proceedings used to take place, and there used to be a clear separation.
Yes.
You could even go
Yes.
forward and try and file for divorce.
Yeah, there are various waiting periods, but I don't think that does very much. You really need to get people on a movement of reconciliation, because in today's society, what do you have? Before you know it, they're sleeping with somebody else, they're living with somebody else, they're kind of, and so then it's gone. Now you've almost irretrievably broken the situation. So what you really need to do is have a movement to try to get to try to get people from the beginning knowing what they're getting into, to continually keep them thinking about that and continually trying to understand it. And then if it does break down, to ensure that the Catholic nature of it is protected to the degree possible. And here's the thing. Remember, Aristotle always said that the beginning is seen in terms of the end. If you know the end, then you can know the beginning. By knowing that you have to go through the Catholic annulment procedure, where they're going to really treat fault as fault, is going to have an impact, right? Some people aren't going to get married because they say, I don't want to go to church and sign one of those things. Get me out. That's not for me. Other people, let's be realistic. The very nature of modern life is such that more than ever, there are all these attractions to people that can take them from the path of marital life. I mean, it is just, it's just part of the society in which we live. So we need even more than ever those things which will help to draw you back into married life. And knowing that you have this promise that you made and it's real is going to make you think, this is real. This isn't, I'm not going to just get this no fault thing. Even if you're starting to think that, you're going to think, okay, I better get back in this because this is for real. Okay, so with that end, it's going to help shape everything in between. So I'm fairly confident, to tell you the truth, that if this were done, I guess this is what I'd say. And please don't repeat this to any of the bishops, but pre-Cana has been a complete failure. Right? Pre-Cana, we should chuck it, because the divorce rate for Catholics is lower, but not significantly lower than the average. So if we have pre-Cana, you'd say, well, then it's a failure because our differences aren't very significant. I think that if they took this up fully, they took my whole program, they did it fully, I think we'd cut Catholic divorce rates, where people end up, after they go through all this and they still want to get a divorce, I think you'll cut them by more than 50%. Okay, because it's going to flush out a high percentage, right, who don't really want that. They'll say, give me Vegas. Vegas is a lot better. And so you're going to flush out a whole bunch of people on that alone, right? They're not going to go through with it. And then in addition, once people are in it, it's going to keep people on a different path. And then even if there are troubles, it's going to put them on a different path. So you've got this whole program to try to ensure that order is maintained. And really, all of the various religious groups should be taking this up. And even secularists who want something different than the no-fault system, which is, an unbelievable system. Yes?
I have a kind of a practical question based on also what they said about her children. When is, if after you have a shared parenting agreement, you put the court slaps the gavel, it's signed by the judge, you both got access to the children in a shared fashion. In your opinion, having knowledge, a bit of knowledge, I guess, about the county system, when does a parent, outside just blatant abuse of children, decide if they want to put their children into the system as far as custody issues go? Because it seems like it's rolling the dice.
I'm not sure I follow your question.
My question is,
you have a shared parenting system and you want to stop it.
no, you just want to, you're not happy with the former spouse and how the children are being raised, but
Sure.
you really have no significant legal issue, but you think you have small little issues that you know that you could go downtown and say to the worker, hey, listen, I want you to investigate this, or
Right.
I'm going to get on the phone with child services because I know the kids are alone during the day for a
Right.
certain amount of time consistently. But then you wonder, and I've heard this from many divorced people, that horror stories that once the system is involved, that it's just a wreck sometimes for the next few years, needlessly, so to speak. I mean, how do you weigh it out? What factors put you in the system?
Right. What factors do you weigh in determining whether to change the shared parenting situation?
Yes. Basically.
And, I really can't tell you. I think what you're hearing is consistent with what everyone's hearing. Okay, so in other words, I've had divorce lawyers, and I'm not a divorce lawyer. I don't, this isn't my regular bread and butter thing. So I'm not sitting down there every day, doing this sort of thing. But it's consistent with everything that I've heard and seen, and you are rolling the dice. The really unfortunate thing that you point out, and why it is such a roll of the dice, is because the most important thing in life, the raising of your children, is being done by the least qualified people. That determination is being made by the least qualified people one can possibly imagine. I don't mean to, be too hard on all these social workers and stuff, but as a general rule, this is a tragedy. So the most important things are being dealt with not in the most important fashion. I shouldn't even criticize them in a way, because they're in this system where they, might have a caseload of, 3,000 kids. And that's what you normally hear is, they got this some incredible caseload they're trying to carry. So this really important thing, the courts don't want to deal with it. That's why shared parenting is the huge default, because they can just chop it in half and say, go away, okay? Go away. So, that's why it's such a promising default, because we want to get rid of it. And whenever you have a system full of stuff, that's what you're going to see, right? You're going to see, settle it out and move on. Nobody really wants to spend any time. I mean, the judge was livid at us. I mean, I can't tell you, I've never seen a judge less happy with me in all my life. So, that's Mr.
Dollars and cents. It's a business.
Pardon?
It's dollars and cents. It's a business, and that's what's happening. And if you change it, all these people are going to lose their jobs, including child and family services. And talk about people that are not qualified. That's not what's important there. More people they have working, the better chance they have of having their job. And that's the way it works. I've seen it too often.
Right. I mean, what you do is you have a huge administrative system that's come into play, and these things tend to be self-generating, like they are in virtually any place. There's a degree of self-generation to all of this stuff, and they're going to kind of plug and chug. And they, what's the best thing for an administrator is people who don't rock the boat, right? When you go down to get your, birth certificate, and you ask the person who gives it to you if they could just, do something special about it, they act like you're asking them to tear off their arm, right? I mean, because they don't want to do it. And that's just a very normal course in these types of situations. So anyone who's rocking the boat in any way, especially like Bay was, you are seen as anathema to the system. The system cannot handle people like you. People like you need to be pounded down so that we don't get any more people like you. That's what the system is built on. The system can only function if people act the way we tell them to, and that is no fault. Okay? They have to act like no fault, because if you don't act like no fault, the system ain't going to work, and that's our system. That's the big problem with it. No fault, people tout no fault as freedom, right? This frees people to get divorced. Well, it's freedom for Vegas marriages. Right? I mean, those people never got married. Sure, they can get out of them freely, easily. Okay, that's fine, right? But in every other system, in every other marriage, it's a problem. Because usually one of them's at fault. One of them's more at fault than the other. Now, these things are difficult to determine. I'll grant you that. But it still doesn't change the fact that somebody is at fault. And the person who's not at fault now is told, suck it up. Why? Because the state doesn't think it's important enough to make that determination in the issue of marriage. We're interested enough, if you get hit by a baseball, while you're at a baseball game, it's important enough to find out who's at fault. It's important to find out who's at fault if, a piece of concrete hits you in the arm and breaks your leg, or you trip and fall on ice. But it's not important enough to find out who's at fault in a marriage situation. Everything else is more important. And that's, that tells you, in a way, what has been created by the no-fault system. The no-fault system says, not just you're free to get a divorce, it says everybody who gets a divorce, who wants a divorce, gets one, and they get a no-fault one. That's what it really does. It imposes the no-fault system on everyone.
You see video of this tape? Tape is being made right now being used in
If they send this to the bishops, I'm in real trouble. Yeah, if it were edited, yeah, I think they should deal with this. I mean, this is a huge issue, and when something like 43%, or no, it's lower than that. I want to say about 30% of all Catholic marriages end in divorce. About 30%. So if 30% are ending in divorce, you've got a real broken system. And I can cut it to 15. I'm willing to take bets on that. I'll get through the brackets on that one. Yes.
John Paul II had made a number of comments to the marriage tribunal.
Yes.
About the issues with the number of annulments granted in the United States, the percentage that are overturned with Roman Road, and the issue especially with Canon 1099. Is there a parallel movement of canon lawyers trying to address the issue of these annulments in the United States? I know obviously the Holy Father made a number of comments, but
yes.
And is there any? Because obviously that would dovetail what you're doing very nicely.
That they're trying to lower the number of annulments. Yes, there are canon lawyers in the United States, and many of the bishops are interested in this. They don't. The divorce situation and the annulment situation in the United States seems anomalous. The only counter argument to it is, well, maybe Catholics aren't really getting married in the first place, so you're not doing a good job at the formation point, right? So but I think either way, play it either way, it is a travesty from the perspective of the bishops and the priests, because either you're letting people get married who aren't properly formed and ready for it, or they are and you're annulling their marriages, right? So either way, you've got a problem. So I don't think anybody's happy with it. Obviously, the huge issue here that in fact, Bay and I were talking about this on the way over here, is it is such a fearsome administrative problem for them. Right? If they really were to take seriously their role in dealing with all these marriage licenses that they granted, if 30% of them are failing, how are they going to deal with that?
Of course.
Absolutely.
So with this covenant marriage idea you're trying to bring up to agreement, is there any way, I'm saying it's summertime when cheap, but any way to have the parties agree to meet a psychologist prior so they can include themselves in the norms of Canon 1099? In other words, we're psychologically of sound mind, so that this cannot be used in a normal case. Later on, we're going to clear that out of the way right now.
Right. I think that you could do that. I think that even if it is used, it still doesn't change the fact that you got to go to the marriage tribunal, and that's the key sort of thing. Okay, now what you have, because really what you have happening with regard to most of the annulment situations in the United States, what happens is the people get civilly divorced, and they're already living in a new life. And here's what happened, and I've talked to some canon lawyers. Well, what happens? They say, by the time we get it, we're thinking, hey, they got a new life, And I said to one canon lawyer, I said, do you sometimes kind of wink at each other and say, hey, let's let this one through because they're already in new lives, and he says, they don't wink. He's had canon lawyers who are dealing with annulments actually say that. They said to him, look, these people have moved on in life. They got, they're remarried, why don't we just let them go? Let it go. He said that's the argument that they made. So that's my point about it, right? I mean, what you do is you actually have, and in a way, right? I mean, there is, I'm with you on that. The problem is, because the church hasn't taken control of the system from the beginning, you now have this really rotten situation that you're trying to do from a pastoral perspective to manage in an appropriate fashion. How do you manage it, right? From a pastoral perspective, you've got a real problem. And so your natural inclination is to do something to fix it one way or the other.
Is there any movement within the church to basically say, do not go to I guess you have to have the state on board first, but so you come to us first with the annulment before you get your civil divorce?
That's what these covenants would require.
Right.
That you got to go forward. In fact, I've developed them in such a way that not only the parties, but the witnesses in the church has the right to ask them to come to him first. So it's not just the parties. Go ahead, Ben.
I want to add something to that, Eric. The first way I learned about all this stuff before I even had knew Steve was that there is canon laws regarding separation. You have to have a church separation decree before you could even approach the civil court. And before no-fault divorce, the state of Ohio system for granting divorces kind of was analogous to what the church's reasons for illicit separation were anyway. But then when no-fault came in Ohio, the church was asleep at the wheel. None of them worried about why. So what I'm asking for in my case is we have a parallel case going in the church tribunal system where I'm asking the church to adjudicate its separation laws regarding my situation. And this is, we're saying that's what this is based on. Whether it's an annulment or illicit reason for separation, even if my husband and I are illicitly married, there's still a separation procedure that we are bound to because of canon law.
You've chosen to come before the Catholic Church to get married. You got to go to them for them to decide what to do next. You can't say, I've decided to choose another system. I'm in the baseball system, but I want to go play football. You can't choose the other system, so you have to go to the church first. And I think that's the key. If you were really to kind of do a gatekeeper kind of thing, and I'm not to say that the church is perfect and its systems are perfect and everything. I mean, we know that there are problems there, but at least we can begin to have some systems that will be in accordance with what we're teaching people, right? What Catholic marriage is. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming. If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. Bay has some forms here. I'd like those of you who I don't already know to at least fill out some sheets for my organization. My organization is known as True Marriage, and you can find me on the web at truemarriage.net. It's one word, caps or small, doesn't matter. It's called truemarriage.net. Okay, so thank you all for coming.